Hello and welcome to Chapter 1 for the class Psychology 312. This is the developing person through childhood and adolescence, the science of human development. What will you learn in this class? Why is science especially crucial for understanding how people develop? Are children always and everywhere the same, or is each child unique, changing from day to day and place to place? What methods are used to study development? And what must scientists do to make their conclusions valid and ethical? All right, part one is understanding how and why. The science of human development. It seeks to understand how and why people of all ages and circumstances change or remain the same over time. These three crucial elements define the science of development. They are science, people, and change. Developmental study is a science. It is multidisciplinary. It leads to practical application and is based on objective evidence. The scientific method is a way to answer questions using empirical research and data-based conclusions. The 5 steps of the scientific method include, on the basis of theory, prior research, or a personal observation, one poses a question. They develop a hypothesis, which is a specific prediction that can be tested. They then test this hypothesis. They design and conduct research to gather empirical evidence, or data. They analyze the evidence. They use the evidence to support or refute the hypothesis. They report the results and share the data and conclusions, as well as alternative explanations. Built into the scientific method, in questions, hypotheses, tests, and replication is a passion for possibilities, especially unexpected outcomes. Speaking of replication, it is the final step. This method is not foolproof. Scientists sometimes draw conclusions too quickly, misinterpret data, or ignore alternative perspectives. Replication is needed to verify their conclusions. Replication is a repeat of a study, usually using different participants, perhaps of another age group, socioeconomic status, or culture. Published replication studies showed 1/3 did not reproduce the same results, and 1/3 was less conclusive than the original. A view from science: overweight children and adult health. Will most overweight children become overweight adults? In a summary of research studies, they found 83% of children maintain their relative weight as adults. If overweight children slim down by adulthood, they are likely to be healthier than those who were never overweight. As normal weight adults, those who had been overweight as children were not at a high risk of disease. You probably know that more than half of all adults in the United States are overweight. So this chart, with only 21% of adults obese, may seem inaccurate. However, 3 facts explain why the data is accurate. The first is obese is much heavier than overweight. The second is the average adult in this study was 34 years old. Middle-aged and older adults are more often obese. The third is that one of the studies that provided much of the longitudinal data was in Finland, where rates of obesity are lower than in the United States. The pie chart shows the breakdown percentages of children and weight classifications. The graph on the right shows how important it is to not be overweight as an adult, and that weight during childhood does not mean that adverse health effects should be expected. Next up is the classic nature versus nurture controversy. In this case, nature is defined as influences of genes that we inherit. And nurture represents influences of our environment, including the entire developmental context. Nature always affects nurture, and nurture always affects nature. Environmental influences include such things as health and the diet of the embryo's mother, family, school, community, and society. There are manifestations. This is represented in the classic nature versus nurture. One is heredity, the other is environment. There is maturation, and then there is learning, and then there is sex, and then there is gender. Epigenetics is ways in which the environment alters genetic expression. Differential susceptibility, that sensitivity to any particular experience differs from one person to another because of the particular genes each person has inherited, or because of events that the person experienced years earlier. An example is in dandelions and orchids. Some people are like dandelions. They are hardy, growing and thriving in good soil or bad, with or without ample sun and rain. Other people are like orchids. Quite wonderful, but only when ideal growing conditions are met. There's a study mentioned in the book about depressed pregnant mothers having an effect on serotonin transporter genes. This shows that the environment, the mother's depression, can affect the genetic expression in the embryo. All right, now we're going to talk about the lifespan perspective. This is part one. The lifespan perspective is a study of human development that takes into account all phases of life and that humans develop throughout the lifespan. Development is viewed as multidisciplinary, multi-contextual, multicultural, multidisciplinary, that's in there twice, and plastic, which just means changeable. At every moment in life, context and culture affect each person's past and shapes their future. Development is multidirectional. There are patterns of change, discontinuity, and continuity. In other words, rapid change, such as the process of becoming a butterfly, versus the gradual change, which might be represented as the growth of a tree. There are critical and sensitive periods. A critical period is when something must happen. For example, there is a crucial period when the embryo grows limbs in the womb. A sensitive period is when something should change but can happen at another time. For example, between ages 1 and 3 are best for learning a language. It can successfully happen later, but is best during the sensitive period. Development is multi-contextual. There are different contexts. There's the physical, which represents the climate, noise, population density. There's family, which are parents' relationship, siblings' value, and other relatives. Then there's the community. This is urban, suburban, or rural, multi-ethnic or not. These are all different contexts that can and do affect how a human develops. Alright, and a little aside, inside the brain, thinking about marijuana. Generally speaking, drugs can affect the brain. This includes possible structural changes in regional size and activity, and neuronal links strengthened or weakened. Brain-linked fear or pleasure can precede drug use. Can be affected by childhood and peer group, and the attitudes and behaviors of next peer group. We'll take a closer look on the next slide. Note that people of every age are becoming more accepting of marijuana, but the effect is most obvious for adults who never heard about reefer madness. This was a film that was made a long time ago to show the quote-unquote evils of cannabis use. Attitudes, politics, and behavior are multidirectional, and so another shift has occurred. The parents of current adolescents are not from the generation that most feared that drug. This signifies changes in the neurological links to marijuana use, irrational fears and desires. Some evidence finds that marijuana smoking alters the brain, but many scientists are not convinced. Research is limited due to legal classifications. All right, now we're going to move on and talk about the ecological systems approach. This was created by Bronfenbrenner and Morris. This is part 1. Each person is affected by many social contexts and interpersonal interactions. In this approach, there are nested levels and systems that surround individuals and affect them. This approach was later named the bioecological theory. All right, and in this system there are ecological systems, and they are listed as such. There are microsystems. These are elements of a person's immediate surroundings, such as family and peer group. The next system is exosystems. These are local institutions, such as school and church. Then there are macrosystems. This is a larger social setting, and it includes cultural values, economic policies, and political processes. Then there is the chronosystem. Literally, it is called the time system. Emphasizes the importance of historical time. Then there is the mesosystem, and it consists of the connections among the other systems. Here's a graph that shows all these systems and how they interact with each other. Looks a little bit messy, but if you read into that, you'll see it makes sense. Each person is affected by the interactions among overlapping systems, which provide the context of development. Microsystems, the family, peer groups, classroom, neighborhood, house of worship, intimately shape human development. Surrounding and supporting the microsystem are the exosystems, which are external networks such as local education, medical, employment, and communication systems that influence the microsystems. Influencing both of these systems is the macrosystem, which includes cultural patterns, political philosophies, economic policies, and social conditions. And mesosystems refer to the interactions among systems, as when parents and teachers coordinate to educate a child. Bronfenbrenner eventually added a fifth system, the chronosystem, to emphasize the importance of historical time, or the passage of time, throughout the lifespan. All right, now we're going to move on to part 1 of history and social class. The historical and the socio-economic context are basic to understanding people. All right, in the historical context, a cohort, your classmates are likely cohorts. Your cohort are born within the same historical period. They move through life together, experience same events, new technologies, and cultural shifts at the same ages, and influence of attitudes and behaviors. Economic context is reflected in socioeconomic status. It involves education, occupation, health, neighborhood, income, nutrition, and habits. It brings advantages and disadvantages. High socioeconomic status creates more opportunity. There are better opportunities for education, jobs, health, and neighborhoods. A low socioeconomic status can hold a person back their entire life. They get less access to good education, better jobs, health care, and the neighborhoods may not be as nice. The United States is an exception to the general rule. The wealthier a nation, the smaller the income gap. Since young families tend to be least wealthy, and since education and healthcare are affected by neighborhood and employment, a wide gap bodes ill for children. Here you can see where the United States ranks and with a few other countries. And I'm going to stop there for part 1 of this lecture. Be sure to pick up on the next section.